I am so thrilled to have you join us for part 6 of Becoming a Dynamic Dual. And this is the last part. So, at this particular point, although we've been asked to bring some testimonies on, we'll see how that works. But I want to take you to a verse that's very important to me. It's in Romans chapter 5, verse 8. And while it's about God's extravagant love towards Jim Hohnberger, it's what God calls us to have towards our spouses. In other words, if God indwells us, if we allow God ourselves to be God governed instead of man managed, then we live the life of Christ in our marriages. And the text goes like this: God demonstrates his own love towards us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. So Jesus didn't look at Jim Homer and say, Jim, when you get your life all straightened out, then I'll show you extravagant love. Jesus says, I'm going to show you extravagant love now to give you motivation to bring you into that love relationship with me. And that's what we are to do with our spouses. So we all have spouses. None of us are perfect. I'm not a perfect husband. My wife's not a perfect wife, but we sure are climbing that journey and going higher with it. And our love is so much greater than when we first got married. And it was great then. So God's saying, though, if you see a defect in your spouse, whether that's a small one or a huge one, you show your extravagant love to them now, because that gives them the motivation to come out of their defect, out of whatever that character flaw is in their life, to bring them higher. And it's your love, it's your dedication to them. It's that extravagance that you will go to them for them that shows them that they are important, that they are worth dying for, that motivates them to come higher. Isn't that beautiful? So, love is extravagant in 3 ways. And I want to go through 3 different categories of that extravagant love. It is extravagant in the price that is willing to pay. It is extravagant in the time it is willing to give. And it is extravagant in the sacrifice it is willing to enter into on your behalf. So let's go through those 3. Number 1. So what is the price of extravagant love? Well, and I'm going to be speaking from my own life too, so it's very much more personal. We'll give you some simple examples. You must be willing to put away all the love killers in your marriage. What do you mean by love killers, you say? These are the actions and the words that kill or dampen the love of your spouse towards you. Song of Solomon puts it this way in chapter 2, verse 15. Catch all the foxes, those little foxes, before they ruin the vineyard of love. It's a beautiful little statement, isn't it? So self-centeredness is the biggest fox. Self-centeredness, we covered that in the first part. In other words, self-centeredness is the biggest fox of them all. It's not coming under God. It's being man-managed instead of God-governed. That's how I put it. So I have to switch out of that man-managed position in every situation in my marriage and say, Lord, what would thou have me to do? Because that self-centeredness creeps in 100 different ways after you get married. You can recognize it by a subtle switch in your unwillingness to sacrifice for the other person. When you sense that, that's the self-centeredness creeping in. For example, and I'm just going to make this a very simple example in Sally's and my marriage. And I'm going to take you back probably 15 years, I don't know, 20 years, whatever it was. Sally was flipping through a gardening catalog. This is when we were living in the wilderness of Montana. We're in southwestern Colorado right now and 30 acres here. But when we were up there, bordering Glacier National Park, looking out in the Rocky Mountains, Sally was flipping through a gardening catalog and her eye caught a white picket fence. She stared at it for a while and she had a vision of, she could see it in the corner of our property, looking out on the glacier peaks, just sitting there. She visualized it in her mind's eye. She could see it over there in that corner, and she tore out the page of the catalog and she set it on my desk with a smiley face on it. I think she's trying to send me a message. What do you think? So I looked at it. I wasn't impressed with it at all. And maybe if I was living in the city and needed some ornament for my yard, that might have been fine. But the view of the Rocky Mountains is the greatest ornament that you could have. So I looked at it. I put a frowny face on the page, and I put it back on our desk. So I thought, well, that should finish that. A year later, Sally was flipping through the same catalog, saw the same white picket fence, and now she put two smiley faces on it and put it on my desk. In other words, get the point, Jim. Are you listening? I want this. Please. That's what she's saying to me. So this time I asked Sally, I went to Sally and said, Sally, do you really want that white picket fence? And she looks at me and says, oh, honey, I really want that. I didn't know all her life. Growing up as a young girl, she always dreamed of having a white picket fence. So I said, but this is where my logic comes in. With her, it's emotion. To me, it's logic. Okay. I said, well, where would it go? She's right over there with a flower bed in front of it, too, honey. It would be such a lovely accent to our yard. And I said, Sally, if we lived in the city, as I said, fine, but we live out in the wilderness and we got the Rocky Mountains. That's a huge white picket fence. So I said, this fence would be a distraction, in my opinion. So I'd have to mow around it. I would have to weed around it. I'd have to trim around it. I'd have to water it. I don't think it's reasonable to buy that white picket fence. So we dropped the conversation, but it came up again and again and again. I don't know if you've ever been there with your spouse and it keeps coming back at you. So Sally was beginning to lobby about the importance of her individuality. What a bargain price it would be, she'd say, dear. It fits into our budget, dear. I've always wanted a white picket fence, dear. And she did it in a very nice fashion. She always does. To me, it made no logical sense. Then one morning, when I was praying, just having quiet time with God, God intervened. You remember when in our first message I talked about being God governed instead of man managed? Well, you're going to find out what I have to deal with now with a white picket fence. So in my thinking, God whispered to me, he says, Jim, is a white picket fence immoral? Well, no, it's not immoral, Lord. Would it strain your budget? No, Lord, it would not strain my budget. Is it so repulsive to you that you absolutely could not live with it? I was getting a sense of where this was going. I think you're getting a sense of where you've probably already made your decision before this little interview that I had with God. Does it violate any biblical principle, Jim? Well, I was reluctant to say this, but probably not. Then why don't you surrender what you think is common sense and logic and buy your wife her fence? Will I be God governed or am I going to be man managed? And you have to ask yourself that question. And a lot of these little foxes that come up in marriage, you really have to answer yourself. I had to put away my logic and I had to get myself into Sally's shoes and think the way she was thinking. God was helping me in this. So would I cling to my selfish opinion and not demonstrate extravagant love, or would I choose to treasure Sally above my opinion? Yes, I have liberty of opinion. I can still have the right opinion, but will I yield it? Because Sally's more important than my opinion. That little fox had to die so our love could actually grow. If there is something that is very important to your loved one and it doesn't violate biblical principle, I would suggest to you, you really consider doing it. So what is God saying to you right now? That's just a simple little example out of our marriage about 20 years ago, okay? But what is God saying to you? Is he bringing to your mind some love killer in your relationship? Because there's lots of love killers in relationship. And we need to slay those love killers. We need to put them away. We need to ask ourselves, Acts 9:6, Lord, what would thou have me to do? I was being man managed in my dealing with Sally, using my logic, and I wasn't thinking about Sally's need for that simple little ornament in her front yard or our front yard. I'm sure it's not a white picket fence with you, but it's something because they come up in every marriage. So if you're being pressed right now, write it down, would you? God's probably trying to speak to you through this. So are you going to prioritize yourself or are you going to prioritize your spouse? That's the question we're asking. That fox might be communication. Maybe your weak area in your marriage is just communication, and it is in so many marriages. It might be finances. That's one of the biggest reasons for divorces today is mismanagement of the finances. It could be your attitude of I can't or I won't. Sometimes it's not just the fact that you won't buy the white picket fence, it's just that you won't surrender your attitude, that becomes the thorn in the side. It could be some habit or lifestyle change or some irritation that really gets to you. I was just working with a couple this past week, a young couple, just been married like 3 years in their 20s. And he's very extroverted. She's very introverted. So when they go to a party, she tends to, as others have told him, she hangs on you too much. So he was siding with other people when they say, well, your wife just is clingy to you. And she doesn't like that when she sees her husband side with the other people that way. And maybe she is a little bit clingy because of her introvertedness. Well, when he came to me, I said, listen, my wife have a principle. We stand back to back and we don't allow anybody to bring any division between us because God has made us one. And then when people come to you and they're saying negative things about your wife, about being too clingy, that you need to go back to back with your wife. You need to draw out your sword and you need to fight against that type of division that's going to come in. Well, I just got a text from her last night saying, guess what? My husband's going to stand with me. And she is just so thrilled. It's just opened her like a little flower. It meant so much to her and didn't really cost him that much, but it was becoming a wedge in their marriage. So what are the wedges in your marriage? We're told in Joshua 24:15, choose you this day whom you will serve. Yes, we serve God, so we always ask God, what do you have us to do? But then we have to ask ourselves, am I going to stand with my spouse or the people that are putting a wedge between us? Which one is it for you? So with that white picket fence, I picked up the little brochure she had, the little page she tore out, and I wrote on it, buy it, I love you, and I put a smiley face on it. And love won in our marriage is irresistible today, not because of a white picket fence, but because we're willing to live extravagant love even in the little things. Are you? Honestly now. Ask your wife to write down, or your husband to write down, what little fox or foxes bother you. If you got 10 of them, only write the top 2 or 3 down. It could be too much to swallow. And begin to address those little foxes. Get them out of your marriage. Today, at age 74, we've been married 50 years. There's no little foxes in our marriage. They're gone. It's beautiful. It's wonderful, but it costs you. You've got to be willing to address those foxes and not put it off for another day because that another day will never come. Number 2, love is extravagant in the time it is willing to give. Your marriage must be made a priority. There is an eroding process in this world that is real and is always draining us, and it comes in many forms. For me, in the past, it was the Green Bay Packers. I used to play football in high school. I was a left halfback. I really enjoyed football. After we were married, I was watching football on Sundays. Sally came to me one Saturday and said, honey, can we go for a walk and a talk tomorrow? That was Sunday. I said, no, honey, I watched the Green Bay Packers. And my wife wants to go for a talk, have some communication, walk hand in hand, share with me whatever's on her mind. Maybe there's a little fox that got in between us or something. I said, no. I said, we'll do it on Monday. So Sally comes to me on Monday. Well, we had Monday Night Football. What am I doing, guys? Is a football more important than my wife's communication with me? And that was a constant in our marriage. That fox, that little fox of sports, even though I enjoyed football and that, is that really more important than my wife? If you put that in a scale, and you weigh them, in my marriage, football was outweighing my wife, and she knew it. She knew it. So she was testing me. So I learned to say, no. If you want to do it on Sunday, football doesn't have a hold over me. It doesn't have power over me anymore, over my top priority, which is my wife. And football's way, way down on the list. But for most men, it's above their wife. It's above their children. And they recognize that. What is God saying to you right now? Are you going to come under God? Are you going to get rid of some of those foxes? And I'm not telling you to get rid of football. I'm just giving that as an illustration in my life. God may be telling you that. I'm not the junior Holy Spirit. It's up to God to tell you what those foxes are. I'm just sharing you from my example. So when we moved to the mountains of Montana, we started what we called swing time. And our younger son had built a little swing, and he hung it between two trees. I told my wife, every day, I'll give you swing time. And that in our time scale, that was at noon. So every noon from 12 to 12:30, that was Sally's time. She could sit on the little swing and she could toot, 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 and she could talk. And I went to interrupt her, and that was her time. Well, one day we were sitting on the swing, and a friend of mine drove in, and he comes walking around to the front of the house where the swing was. And he says, Jim, I need to talk with you. And I looked at my watch. I said, well, it's 12:10. I said, I have some swing time with my wife. I'll be done at 12:30. You can go into the house, get a glass of water, and I'll be with you then. And he looks at me like, hey, I'm here. You're going to make me wait 20 minutes? And I looked at my friend and I said, listen, you're a businessman. If you have a client in your office and another client comes in unexpected, do you cancel that present client and put the other one before him? No. He looked at me and says, I've heard you preach this before, but now I'm on the receiving end of it. So he went into the house. Then he comes to the front picture window. He's got a glass of water. He's just looking at me, like shaking his head like, you actually live this? You're actually going to turn down time with me for your wife? Yes, that's right. Because you must master your time with each other, because the devil's going to steal it. No matter what it is. It could be a friend showing up. It could be church work. It could be whatever. The devil will erode your top priorities. So you have to decide good, better, and best. What's best? Well, it's best that I have communication with my wife and I give her the opportunity to share her day with me. And she so looks forward to that. She can just chat away, and she knows that unless it's an emergency, not that we wouldn't break it if there was an emergency, somebody breaks a leg or, there's a health crisis or whatever. But if it's not an emergency, you can go in the house and get a glass of water. I'm with my queen right now. And she knows that. That's extravagant love. It's not a big thing, but boy, it's a thorn in so many marriages. There are many things that take the place in our lives and steal away the priority of our spouse from us. For me, it was competitive sports, like I shared with you with football. It was the news. And that was more important to me listening to all that garbage that's going on in the world than it was with my wife. A lot of people today, it's the internet. It could be their TV programs, mindless phone calls, emails, texts, social media. I remember when Canadian Union College called me and they wanted me to put on a weekend series for all the students up there. And then the head psychologist at the college said, Jim, in all the messages you're going to deliver to the students, the college students, we want you to speak on social media. And at that particular point in my life, I'd never been on social media. I didn't really know what Facebook was or anything of that nature. And I said, why do you want me to speak on it? And they said, because it's destroying our students' lives. I said, really? So I went to a friend that I knew that was on Facebook. I said, can I use your Facebook account? And I took a yellow pad of paper and a pen. I spent the whole day on social media. And I used that person's account and I started writing down what was happening to me through it. When I got done with it, I thought, I've got to call some people that are on social media, ask them some questions. Because if I go before college students and I deliver a message, they can spot a phony a mile away. I got to make sure I know what I'm talking about. So I called this one gal, and very, very Christian, upright, and I knew she would tell me the truth. So I called her and I said, Elizabeth, I said, I was on social media and I went from this friend's account to your account. And I said, I noticed you have 386 friends. She said, oh, yes, I do. And I said, well, that's good. I said, can I ask you some questions? She says, well, what are you going to ask me? I said, well, does that really matter? Are you going to be truthful with me? I need to know some answers. So I asked her some questions. I said, so when do you go on your social media? Well, Mr. Hohnberger, I don't want to answer that. I said, well, I need to know so I know how to respond to these college students. Well, the first thing when I get up in the morning, I said, the first thing before you even go to God? Yes. I said, well, when do you do this? She said, well, I get my computer and I sit in the uh, lazy boy chair that we have. And I said, well, what do you do? What do you look for? What are you doing on it? Do I have to tell you, Mr. Hohnberger? I said, no, you don't have to tell me, but I need to know these things because I'm not on social media. I am now. I have a Facebook account and I post a spiritual message every 2 weeks. That's all I'm on Facebook for. She said, well, I look up my old boyfriends. I said, what? Aren't you married? She said, well, yes. I said, why are you looking up your old boyfriend? She said, well, I want to see how miserable they are. I said, what? So anyways, the bottom line was she's typical of misplaced priorities. What are we doing, folks? What is God saying to you right now? And I know so many people that go through unprofitable social obligations, but they go through them. They have church responsibilities that end in nothing. Nothing changes. They've been there 10, 20 years doing the same thing and nobody changes. Or they have ministry obligations that change no one. What are we doing? Too much worldly success. That was in my life. I had to cut the success down so I could spend more time with my queen. So I analyzed my life, my time, and my priorities. And I came up with this. It's on our website. If you go to my website, you'll see the list of my priorities. And they are number one, I must have oneness with God every day of my life. I must connect with God, not just read something in the scriptures. I'm talking about a practical application of being aware of God's presence in my life daily and responding to that presence. Yes, that's number one. Jesus said, I can of myself do nothing. If Jesus could do nothing in his day without the presence of God with him, what about Jim Hohnberger? What about you? And so many of us depend upon our knowledge instead of an experience with God throughout our day, walking by our side, guiding us. That's number one. Number two, I must have an irresistible marriage. Not just being married, but an irresistible marriage. That is number two priority. I will not put anything in the way of it. Football had to go out. News had to go out. Social obligations had to go out. Church priorities had to be put on hold until my marriage was irresistible. Number three, it was to have a connected family. My Matthew and my Andrew are top priorities. They still are today. They're in their mid 40s, but they're still top priorities. And number three was to live a simple life. Because if I don't live a simple life, I won't have the time for these priorities. I had to uncomplicate my life. I didn't need 5 vehicles. It complicates my life. I didn't need a TV set. Complicated my life. I had to bring my life down to the irreducible minimum so I had the time for my top priorities. And number 5 was touching other people's lives. We're not supposed to be the Dead Sea. We don't just get our marriage and our families in order and then just live in a cave with our white robes waiting for Christ to come. No, we are to touch other people's lives. We're to be instrumental in helping people find what we found. And so when I wrote out our priorities, that gives me deciding power. It allows me to know what's worthy of my time, my attention, my energy, and my talent. And it allows me to say no to things. I work with a lot of people now, one-on-one. Had this young man out. He's in his mid 30s. And the thorn in his marriage was when he comes at home, he's into all these gaming things. I've never been on them. I've never played them. But his wife says he spends hours. He'll even skip eating, won't spend any time with his wife. The thorn in their marriage was all this gaming. And I worked with him probably 2 years, and he never put it away. And I finally said to him on one of my hikes, I said, when we get in the car, we're going to drive to your home. We're going to get your gaming devices. We're going to take them to my home. We're going to put them in my wheelbarrow. I'm going to give you a sledgehammer, and you're going to destroy that stuff. The Bible says make no provision for sin. And it was an idol to him. Yes. So he says, you're serious? I said, yes, I'm serious. We've been talking about this for 2 years in your marriage, and it's still a thorn. It's about time we take action and get rid of that thorn, get rid of that fox in your marriage. Those games are mindless games. They destroy your mind, they destroy your spirituality, and they're destroying your marriage. So I said, if you're not strong enough, then I'm going to aid you. But I'm not gonna beat him to death. I'm giving the hammer to you. We got to our house, we put him in the wheelbarrow, and he says, I can't do it. You do it. I said, oh no. No, this has to be you. This can't be Jim Hohnberger, be your junior Holy Spirit. I'll help you as a friend because you're weak. And you know you need to do this. You got to do it. He said, I got thousands of dollars into that stuff. I says, don't matter. What is your marriage work? What is your walk with God worth? And it's affecting your family. You spend hours every day on this stupid stuff. He took that sledgehammer and he smashed that stuff. And it's been out of his marriage. And he's had more time for his wife, more time for his children, and more time for God. What is the fox in your marriage? Do it. And I talk to pastors all the time. I travel and speak at a lot of churches, and pastors' marriages and families are falling apart. And they're focused on the breadth of their ministry and not the depth of their experience. And I'll tell a lot of pastors and ministry leaders too. It's not just pastors, but ministry leaders. I take them to the story of Moses. God called Moses up for one of the greatest works that ever to be. He was to go back into Egypt and bring God's people out of bondage. 40 years of training. Moses now is called to go back to Egypt. And on his way back to Egypt, an angel of the Lord stops him, pulls out a sword, and says, Moses, if you take one more step forward, I'm giving orders from heaven to slay you on the spot because you have left something undone in your home. That's in Exodus 4, verse 24. Go and read it. God was going to kill Moses because you can't do outreach if you haven't done the inreach right. What is God saying to you right now? Are you more involved in the outward peripheral than you are the inward? Sal and I have a saying: we never focus on the breadth of the work God's called us to. We only focus on the depth. And if the depth is in place, God takes care of the breadth. And so, if you want to increase your outreach, you increase your inreach. And that starts with the marriage. Then it goes to the family. And if that's not in place, how can God bless the outreach? And that's why so many of our churches are floundering today, because the leadership in the church is non-existent. When I first moved to where we are in southwestern Colorado, the pastor of the church arrived at my door because we weren't attending the church, and he knocks on the door, rang the doorbell, I should say, And he says, "Hi, I'm your pastor. Can I come in?" I said, "Come on in." He says, "Well, I heard that you moved into this area, and I know we haven't met, but," he says, "we need your help." He says, "Every marriage in my church is dysfunctional. Will you please come and help us?" And that's the pastor saying every marriage, his elders too, are all dysfunctional. No wonder the church isn't growing. That's the first angel's message, a demonstration of God's glory living in and through you. So I eliminated all the good in my life so I can focus on the best. And the best is having daily oneness with God in and through my day, having an irresistible marriage, having a connected family, living a simple life, and then reaching out to other people. And I have a much fuller and richer marriage today because of that. And you know something? I don't know anybody feels sorry for me because I don't have one of those little gaming devices, because I'm not watching the Green Bay Packers on football on Sunday. I don't know anybody feels sorry for me because I'm in love at age 74, but there's a price. Are you willing to pay the price? You got to get rid of those foxes. You got to give time to it. Number 3, extravagant love is measured by the sacrifice you're willing to enter into. God's principle calls us to focus on our spouse. God focuses on me every day. And if God focuses on me and I'm going to become married to Christ, are we not to follow the pattern? There's times in our marriages that our wife's duties are overwhelming. And I see my wife, because we're involved in ministry and we're involved in hundreds of people's lives around the world, it can be consuming. And sometimes my wife's time is very consuming. And God will call me, he'll whisper to me, "Jim, pick up the iron. Help her with the laundry. Make the bed this morning for her. She's tired. Clean the kitchen after she's done canning or while she's doing the canning. Help her out in your organic garden. Help her weed, help her plant, help her, whatever it is. Relieve her duties. Whatever it takes, do it." What's God saying to you? She was important to me when I was courting her. I'd do anything then. I'd swim the biggest ocean. I'd climb the highest mountain, sacrifice for her. And I'm not going to do it after I'm married to her? That's sick. Yeah, that's a lost love. That's not extravagant love, if that's where you are. When my wife sees me sacrifice in that way for her, even in the little things, a lot of the stuff that I share with you, they're not big things, they're little things. When she sees me do, that knits her heart to mine. So what is God asking you to do to knit your heart to your spouse's heart? Do it. That's a priority over the Lord's work, over football, over gaming, whatever it is that gets in the way. To me, it comes right underneath my connection with God. It's that serious. So my Sally sacrifices for me too in many different ways. She skydives with me. I always wanted to skydive. So we took a plane up to 15,000 feet. Here's my simple Sally. She doesn't want to skydive, but she jumps out of the plane 15,000 feet and she skydives with me. She scuba dives with me. I always wanted to scuba dive with a shark. She's down there with a big hammerhead shark with me at 125 feet below the surface. Yeah, that's my Sally. Is that her skill set? No. She also canoes with me. I like to explore up in the Quetico up in Canada, wilderness area, canoe area. And I love to go up there in May and we just canoe around. She comes with me. She explores with me. She backpacks with me. Sally is active in all my interests, not because she's naturally drawn to them, but because it's important to me. That's what it means when God says, "And the two shall become one." So if it's important to me, if she likes me to go shopping with, I hate shopping. I mean, I hate it. But she likes me to go shop because she wants my opinion on a dress or something that she's going to buy. She wants me to go 2 thumbs up or thumbs like this or thumbs down like that because she wants to please me. I get bored shopping, but I'll go with her because it's important to her. Truly, we are to sacrifice these little foxes for our spouses, and that keeps love alive. It speaks louder than our words. I can remember when a friend of mine came to pick me up and he dropped his wife off at my house. They were in the house and him and I were going to go away for the day. And his wife wanted to spend the day with my wife. And so when we were walking through the kitchen, the girls were there and I just gave up, which is typical for me. I go up to my wife and put my arms out and give her a great big hug and give her a real nice smooch right on the old lips, and I tell her I love her and then I leave. That's just standard fare for us. So we're leaving. I go up to Sally, give her the big hug and big smooch and tell her I love her. And I start walking on and I watch my buddy and his wife is standing right next to my wife. And she's like, just kind of like, am I going to, come on, my turn. And he just walks by her, says, love you, and walks out with me. And on the way out to the car, we get in the car. I'm thinking, if I was her and all he says to me is love you, that's it. No hug, no kiss, nothing. I'd be hurting. I'd be wounded. So I had prayer, which I always do before we leave, with him. And the Lord was saying, listen, buddy, we're going to do a do-over. And I looked at him and I said that. He says, what's a do-over? I says, you got it all wrong, buddy. You can't go out into your day having your wife's spirit wounded. I said, did you see the look on your wife's face after I gave my wife a hug and a kiss and told her I loved her? And you just walk right by her? What's going on in her heart? Her heart's more important than what you and I are going to do today. Now, we're going to do a do-over. Now, you don't have to do this, but we're going to go back in there. And because you are so lame at loving your wife, all you got to do is follow me. Okay, he said, okay. He was a little reluctant, but he said, okay. So I went back in there and the girls of luck, we walked in the kitchen. I said, honey, come here. Sally comes over and I take her and I bend her over, real romantic like, and she's laying in my arms now and I give her a great big kiss. And I said, I love you. I stand her back up and I look at my buddy like, all right, come on, buddy. Now it's your turn. And he did it. His wife, that closed shoulders she had and that sad look she had on her face, after he got done bending her over in a real romantic pose, if you will, telling her he loved her and standing her back up. I mean, she was like a candle that was lit. Yeah. And what does it cost him? Love ya versus really letting her know you are important to me. That's sacrifice. That's what God did on Calvary to me. He didn't say love you. He bent over and he showed his love for me. He sacrificed everything for me. And that tells me, that's what draws me to Jesus Christ. So make sure your spouse knows that they are valuable. So, and guess what? They'll improve your life. That was the last message we had. Her input improves my output. That's a side benefit that you get. So what is God saying to you right now? And the two shall become one flesh, Matthew 19:5. So I have 3 questions for you. We'll close with that. So the first question is this. Would your spouse say your love is extravagant? Go ahead and ask them. I was asked recently by a doctor. He's taking a course at a college, and he's supposed to have a mentor. So I asked him to go home and ask his wife if there's any thorns in her side and if they have extravagant love. And he said, well, I know what she'll say. But she didn't say it. There was a thorn. He didn't know it. So would your spouse say your love is extravagant in the way that Jesus' love is extravagant for us? Answer that question. And I know the masses are going to say no. Then do something about it. Number 2, when are you going to begin dealing with the love killers in your marriage? I had to deal with the love killers. I had to put away the sports. Oh, poor Jim Hohnberger can't watch football. I feel so sad for him, but I'm in love. There's nothing, no thorns in my marriage. Which one is better? What are the foxes in your marriage? I'm not telling you what you have to do. I'm just sharing from my experience. So when are you going to deal with those love killers in your marriage? You know they're there. God's grace is there. His presence is with you. He'll enable you. He's speaking to you. So you're going to be God governed or man managed. That was the first message. Number 3, what sacrifice is God asking you to enter into? Yeah, pay it. My friend, he had to get rid of his gaming things. He said he had thousands of dollars in that stuff. So what? Poor substitute for the marriage, isn't it? So, what sacrifice is God asking you to make? I was working with a young man the other day, and he was, pornography was destroying his marriage. So I spent the day with him. And at the end of the day, I said, "You need what do you do? When do you do this?" He says, "I do it on my iPhone." And I said, "You got to get rid of your iPhone." What? I said, "Yeah, you get rid of your iPhone. You buy a jitterbug. All you can do is text and receive calls. Can't get on the internet. Make no provision for sin." He looked at me and said, "You're really serious, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, I'm serious." So, what sacrifice is God asking you to enter into? It's not complicated, but there's a price that you pay to become a dynamic dual. And are you willing to pay that price? That is the question. May God bless you in paying that price.